our mics are all still on, so we'll just continue on with our session and welcome staff members to the table. If everyone can turn your name tags around. Okay. All right, so I'm very appreciative of the feedback that we just had from the community. Really glad. We've had several public hearings where we haven't had very many folks come out to make a statement, so I'm always appreciative when we actually have folks that take the time to do that. So it looked like we had about 10 speakers tonight. There was clearly a theme amongst those speakers, and I think we'll probably address some of that as we move into segments of this work session. So Dr. Lockard, I guess we'll probably, did we want to go back through the slides that Mr. Hartlove provided earlier and see what questions folks had at this point?
We certainly can do that, and I'll reiterate what Chris had said. Our right now our revenue projection from the county remains the same as was estimated. The only change that Chris shared was change to the state revenue. So Chris, if you just want to highlight that again, and then we can have some conversation around that.
Sure. You know, this slide is just straight facts. It's just the numbers, what they are, and the only thing I would emphasize here is it's still an estimate, but this is a much probably better estimate. This is based upon the governor's budget. It's a real number. Could it change through the course of the legislative session, state Annapolis session? It could. There's certainly some, you know, but typically this is pretty close to what we get. So just throw that out there as additional information. But this slide doesn't really need any additional speaking points. It's just facts. As far as the next slide is just, again, it's just the drivers, and the state formula it's a complicated formula. But when you boil it down, the three main drivers are enrollment, inflation, and wealth. And two of the three helped us. One pulled us down a little bit, backed off of the increase a little bit, and that was the wealth. And again, that's it's a good thing. It's good that our county wealth is per pupil wealth is increasing. That's certainly a good thing. From just a school system funding perspective, there is a negative aspect to that. But I wouldn't lose sight that we're still getting additional revenue from the state. So it's still, I think, a good news situation. It's just not as, you know, we would hope it was going to be a little bit better, but still additional dollars from the state. So. And then this just kind of quantifies where we stand, and you know, we have that difference there that we're going to have to look at over the coming couple months to try to figure out how we're going to address that, and the shortfall at this point. And again, it's an estimate. With still, these numbers there's certainly a chance that these numbers can move some, but right now we're sitting at $1,173,233 difference between revenue and expenditures.
And Chris, how much do you think these numbers could change? You said they're not final yet. What are the pieces that could change, and how much could that potentially impact?
I think they're definitely more settled than they were a month ago. So I think these are close to what they're going to be, but certainly. We're always looking at our expenditures. We're always looking for areas where there could be savings, and you know, so we're certainly we're always doing that anyway. It's just a good best practice. But when you have a situation like this, the first thing we'll do is just go back and look at everything again. We'll revise. You know, we'll look at everything. We'll revisit everything. See if if there's any places that we can find to make this shortfall a little less. But in my experience is that the state number will be pretty close to that. You know, there could be some legislation that comes up that impacts us, or sometimes there have been errors that that have happened in this calculation, and they'll come back later and say, "Wow, we miscalculated." And you know, if that's I remember that one time in 15 years, so it doesn't happen very often, but it could happen, so there could be a change there from the state. The county is the number that they have in their plan, so we're hopeful that that's a pretty solid number. That's probably the biggest number in the entire budget. So yes, there's room for movement, but this is certainly a lot more settled than it was a month ago.
It's no reason to think that the wealth calculation or any of that stuff's going to change significantly this session.
No. That's another reason probably that it won't change, is because they have this big change that's upcoming. Right. So even if we were to successfully say there's a problem with the formula, it hasn't treated us fairly, they would say, well, we'll get that in the, that'll be part of the Kerwin change. That wouldn't be part of this version of the formula.
So this is likely the last year
I think there's
that this formula will be
one more
used.
year with.
Or is there's one more year?
Possibly another year.
One more year.
Since Ted's here, Ted, I hate to bother you, but I am going to ask you a question. I was just interested, since the Carroll's Wealth for People was increased, have you seen an increase in county revenue in any particular area, or could you just let us know what's going on?
Okay, just keep in mind the wealth calculation at the state doesn't necessarily mean we have an extra dollar, because it's all relative to every other jurisdiction.
Yes, and I understand that, but I just wanted to see if if the county is receiving new revenue.
Well, yes, we are, and revenue will go up. But of course, expenditures go up as well, just like, you're all expecting an increase in your budget. The cost of doing everything else goes up. We're still working through our revenue projections.
Okay.
I'm not expecting that we're going to be going to the commissioners with any, okay, we've got this unexpected pile of money to spend. We have income tax is going to come in greater than we expected. Recordation tax is probably going to be less. Investment income is certainly going to be less. We're seeing in property tax, the homestead tax credit is starting to become a factor again, where it hasn't been for a number of years, as people's assessments start to go up. So, yeah, we'll have an increase, but I don't think there's anything we're looking at that is going to give the commissioners a whole lot of discretion to say, let's do something with this money.
Okay, I was just curious because I think there would have to be an increase, and I got my assessment, so you will be getting more dollars from me. And I was just wondering, to see like in the future where we are. Thank you.
And Chris, I'm glad to hear that the number is relatively close, we think, from the state at this point, because we've seen that number, so the estimate keeps coming down a little bit each time we talk, but it's the different pieces get locked in, right? So that if the wealth formula, if we're not really expecting that to change, so we should be very close on this number.
Right. I feel much better. This number is a solid number. I'm not a betting person, but I'd bet some money that this will be very close to what we get.
Now, I'll just remind everybody the obvious, and we saw it on the timeline at the end of the brief presentation here. We do have a long way to go still until it's time to reconcile in early May, end of April. And so, as Chris mentioned, we're always looking for efficiencies. We continue that work. And so, I appreciate, I'll jump to the public comment. I really appreciate the feedback we received. We started early this year, early in the fall, going to several different venues, asking for feedback, soliciting folks who attended those to working groups to share their best thinking. We solicited feedback via email and through information we sent out. We have some tough choices to make. You remember last year, in my first year here, I came and we talked about a lot of positions that we felt were important as we looked at our strategic plan, looked at the needs of our kids and our teachers. We weren't able to realize any of those. We focused on compensation of our employees, which we also think is really important, and that's a big component of this budget as well. So know that we appreciate that feedback. I know we have a lot of hard choices to make. I will say that we did hear what folks had to say throughout the process. The three items that I'm proposing beyond, competitive compensation for our employees, special education teachers and support, the school psychologist and the technician were actually the first three in terms of when we tabulated the feedback from all of the town halls that we did. Those were the order. I wish that I could make it, 26 special education teachers and 6 school psychologists, and you get what I'm saying. So we do have some tough decisions to make. We do feel like this is not a one-year approach or attempt. We're looking, this is why we also did some work with our county this year in terms of future years budgeting. So we could look out over several years to anticipate what could we continue to build and add. And that's the goal. It's to not stop. Again, years and years of cutting and cutting. We stopped cutting last year. I think we're turning that corner to begin to look at what are those resources that need to be in our schools supporting students and teachers, to support our students and our teachers in their achievement, their success. We're starting this year. I look to continue that over the next several years. And our students' needs have changed. It's been a long time since we've talked about adding positions to our schools to support students and teachers. A long time, as in a decade. So I know these are tough decisions. I know we wish we could have many more to consider. But at the same time, we're also working hard to try to look at the compensation component too and stay market competitive with surrounding counties.
And Dr. Lockwood, I really appreciate those comments and would like to reemphasize a couple of them. Like, I think this is really a culmination of a year. The budget exercise hasn't just been since December, right, to come to this budget. It's been an entire year. We started this process well over a year ago in anticipation of what was going to happen this year. And I think that we've positioned ourselves well with all the work that you've been doing, with all the building the strategic plan, going through the strategic plan and through each department in the school system, and basically saying these are our needs. This is what we need to do to achieve the strategic plan. Then outlining and saying, okay, these are our needs for the strategic plan. Now, what are the plans around each one of those pieces? We've taken the technology strategy and built an entire technology delivery services plan. We've taken all the feedback that we've gotten on special ed, and we're building a special ed delivery services plan. And I think the relationship that we've built with the commissioners, they now see that, okay, we are concertedly building these plans. We're not just saying we need more money. We're saying, look, this is what these are what our needs are, and we're building a plan to get there in measured steps over time. And when we get those funds, this is exactly how we're going to use them. And I think that they're responding very well to that. And I think we're in a good place now, and it's because of all the work that's been done with the system and through these town halls. And we heard loud and clear in all the town halls about the special ed resource requirements, which is why those positions rose to the top of all the various positions that we were thinking about for strategic planning. And if I understand it correctly, the 6 positions plus the school psychologist would be a 10%.
Right. So I appreciate you bringing that up. There's a little more thinking behind, obviously, than just adding some positions, because we've looked at a couple things. One, we've heard what people are saying, and we recognize some of the challenges for sure. 2, there's other components. We heard some of those tonight. Planning time, more time in front of students, and not as much time constantly being bombarded with paperwork. Some of those things are out of our control because of some of the federal and state requirements. And we can certainly look at some of the local requirements that we have in place to make sure we're not adding too much to that. But to your point, we look at 6 positions at our elementary level. That represents a 10% increase in our special education. Nick, that's correct, right? We looked at those numbers the other day. A 10% increase to that staffing allocation at the elementary level. And I can certainly ask Nick to speak a little bit more to this so the board and the public hears. In addition to just 6 positions, we're also looking to tackle some of those things like planning time. Nick, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Good evening. Very thankful for our special educators and all that they do, and I'm thankful that they shared their voices tonight and all the wonderful things that they're doing for our kids and for our families. What Dr. Lockhart said is just what we're doing. We develop an annual staffing plan that captures all the supports and services that we provide to students, and we're taking a very deeper dive. We always take a very close look at that, and the allocation of the resources that we have are done very strategically and based on the data. You've heard me talk before when we're talking about students with disabilities, formulas, kids don't fit into a formula because there's lots of complex factors that go into individual kids and students. So really, when we're assigning staff, we look at individual students, their needs, the uniqueness of those. I work closely with our supervisors, our consultants, our principals, and the staff to get their feedback. I take feedback throughout the course of the year on the process on what's working and what's not working. And we have to make some very difficult decisions and really prioritize and identify where are those places where the needs are the greatest. But we are always looking at all those other pieces that go into what we do in special education, even beyond instruction. We're instructors, we're teachers first. But the compliance side of things, the paperwork things that are there exist for a reason, and they're all driven by law, by federal law, and by state law as well. The tools that we've developed at the local level, our hopes are that they help us more than they hurt us in the time that it takes away to do certain things. We use a great example of this are the tools that we use to determine eligibility. We're not required by law to use a tool for eligibility, but we've developed some very simple tools that are framed around some questions, yes, no. If it's a yes, we go to this. If it's no, we go to that, and we have some data to support. So the function of those tools is to help guide our teams to make a good, effective decision, because when we make a mistake, they are costly when we are out of compliance. So we want to try to minimize those as much as we can. But we're always keeping in mind, too, those other demands and things that are out there that our teachers have to do. Because in Carroll, our teachers are both teachers, special educators, and they're also case managers as well.
Mr. Shockney, I really appreciate that. The fact that we're rethinking, it's not just that we're taking 6 bodies and throwing it at the situation, right? I mean, there's a lot of thought process going on behind this and
Sure.
saying, okay, we need to rethink how we deliver those
Sure,
services.
and we, and I mean, for very much from us, and my staff has heard this, and our families have heard this, this is an equity piece for us. And when we're talking about equity, equity doesn't always mean equal in what we're doing. So we do know that, at the elementary level, for example, we conduct way more initial assessments at the elementary level than we do at the secondary and high school level. And that's a big factor as we look at what we're doing and how we're doing it, as to what supports we can provide to better support our elementary students. And it makes sense that we're doing more assessments in the elementary world. That's a trend that's typical, and that's what we should be doing. But at the same time, we might need to, we're trying to find a way to put a little bit more support in that area for our teachers.
And as far as the interventions that are in place prior to looking at students for special ed, I know we had tried to refine those in the past, and so is that something we're looking at maybe refining or looking at different?
I mean, when we look at eligibility for a student with a disability, a very clear criteria, and a lot of which we're looking at, have there been interventions attempted over time, and has there been success with those interventions? Because typically that may be a sign that there may not be a disability, there might be a gap in learning or a need that could be accommodated for there. I don't want to speak, Mr. Anderson, do you want to speak a little bit about the just on the gen ed side of
Sure, absolutely.
things?
So, Dr. Dorsey, thank you for bringing that up. I've been working with Cindy and other folks to begin to look at a response to intervention type of model. As Nick said, there's multiple models to look at when you are considering qualification for special education programming. But what we're really interested in is looking at, are we exhausting all of those types of interventions, whether that they're a Tier 1 intervention done by the classroom teacher or something that becomes a little bit more intensive prior to even having a discussion around special education services, because there's a lot of interventions that can be put in place. And the most important thing, and I've talked about this before, is that we are able to be in a position here in Carroll County Public Schools to identify the efficacy of a specific intervention and how well it's being used based on our investment. Because it really is reliant on sometimes the student that's receiving it, the person that's able to deliver the intervention also. Oftentimes, it may not be, we may not be fortunate enough to have a certified teacher to deliver that intervention, and that's very much a reality. Speaking as a principal in many different places, that's what, and yourself, that's what you have to do at times. So we have to look at where are we having the largest impact. We need to look at investing in those programs or potentially in those evidence-based types of opportunities that we're seeing that are working in other places before we even start talking about special education. I believe where you may be going is, are we looking at, is there a way to address some of the needs before we even go down that road?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the last 4 years, and I think everybody knows here that I have been stating almost all the time about how elementary education is in dire needs. Our family dynamics has changed unbelievably just in the last 10 years, let alone 40 years. And I have been meeting with teachers and administrators and seeing the need of special ed advocates, educators, to help ease the paperwork and being able to teach at the same time. They have a double-edged sword, and they have to make decisions every day. And they cannot meet all the needs of their students. They cannot meet all their compliances, and they are just being worked and worked and worked. And I am so glad to see those 6 positions. I thought it was wonderful with the town halls, and we came to an agreement. And I think it's very important that we start at the elementary area. Let's hope that we can reach out and help more students and get them on the right path so that they continue to see progress through the middle school and the high school. So I wish we could do more on that. And I'm very glad that, you know, our families are in dire need also. That family dynamics has totally changed, and I'm so glad that we are adding another school psychologist. I know we need counselors, but the school psychologist can do a lot more than a school counselor. And unfortunately, we've got to crawl before we walk. But we have not been able to hire anybody for over 10, 12 years, and this is just unbelievable. And I've lived through all of this. So this is progress. I know it's not enough. It's the tip of the iceberg. But we are going forward, and we can go ahead and chip away at these again. And Ted, if you ever have any extra money when you go through that revenue, please send it our way. And I'm not kidding, because we do need more help in special education and other areas. So if you have any extra when you're going through that pencil, don't forget me. We need more.
The 6 positions will go a long way. There definitely are needs, but the 6 positions will go a long way in us being able to meet needs, and then also to get creative with the other resources that we have to be able to best deploy them in the most appropriate areas. And a lot of times it's very difficult, especially when the years in which we didn't have staff to add. You know, we had to find a way to make it work with what we had. And remember, in special education, we provide services birth through 21. So we had to get really creative. We'll still be creative, but these 6 positions will allow us to be able to target some very specific areas in which we want to alleviate those caseload size and provide more time with kids. And we'll also still continue to be creative with all those other resources that we have and deploy them in a way that works best for our kids.
Yeah, Nikki, that's well said. There's the process that we have now put in place. There's nothing arbitrary about it. It's with the intention of hopefully there will be more positions coming, as Dr. Lockhart said. in regards to making sure that we can provide adequate service for our students. But it is with the intention of making sure that there is more opportunity for teachers to be working with students. And we are extremely sensitive to the work environment of our staff, but we're even more sensitive to making sure our students are getting the service that they deserve. And that's what our new planning is based around. We feel like we are gonna take some very positive steps over the next
By law, we're required to provide a free and appropriate public education. However, I will say our teachers, our related service providers, and all of our folks in special ed and beyond, they work hard to do the best they can for their students, because we know that it takes a lot of work to narrow the gap. That's the whole function of what we do in special education. We're trying to narrow that gap, get that student to where they need to be, to where we can hopefully work ourselves out of a job for that student. But our staff works very hard. I'm very thankful for what they do, and I'm very thankful for them sharing their voices tonight.
And what is the time frame that we expect the special ed staffing?
So in May for approval, I will bring to you the special education staffing plan, and that will have the staffing allocations for the year outlined in that. And then once approved, the budget is finalized. Then I work with schools to identify where those positions are going to go. And then we work very diligently to find good quality folks to fill those positions, and we get them trained and get them going.
So we've taken this plan, if you will, and Cindy and I have developed a principal vetting group where we have a number of principals from high school, middle school, and elementary school, and we presented the plan to them, our thinking, our approach, and it was highly endorsed by all three levels. And our focus is right now going to be at the elementary level.
As this hopefully all moves forward, listening to people from around the state and even other states, we seem pretty blessed. They're half afraid to add new positions because they can't fill their current positions. How likely are we, how hard is it going to be to find 6 more quality special ed people?
Well, I'll let you speak.
Yeah, I think we're going to be fine. We are an attractive place to work, and we always have a high number of applicants. In the typical hiring season, we struggle at times. We have a vacancy during the year. But we work hard. We attend job fairs. We work with our local partners, and we really get ahead of that. So we'll start that interviewing process as soon as we can. But I do not anticipate any struggles finding candidates. Not only good candidates for these positions as well, too.
And I believe we started this year fully staffed, which not every district can say.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I have 2 questions, and these are just general questions that I've heard from the public. The first one is, why do we offer services from birth till 21? And the second one was, and I don't know why people have kind of like this stigma regarding it, but why those students with special needs are in all of our schools and they're not isolated in one school.
Sure, great questions. So it's a legal requirement that we provide services birth through 21. That's part of IDEA and further defined in COMAR. We're required to do that, so that's why we do that part. The key to what we do in special education, we're always trying to provide the supports that a student needs in the least restrictive manner. So we offer a continuum of supports from being the least restrictive to the most restrictive. And the least restrictive might be, some consultative services with the teacher, or some push-in supports. And then there's this giant continuum. And the most restrictive could be a non-public school or placement. So it's our job to identify just what that student needs to be able to access the curriculum and content for them. So, we very much believe in special education inclusion. We want to give our students our opportunities to participate in instruction and activities with their non-disabled peers. But that's just, number one, it's a good thing, but it's also a legal requirement as well. We have to, as we develop an IEP, and yes, They are very detailed. But at the end, the last thing that we do is determine the placement, or the least restrictive environment in which that student will receive those accommodations, supports, services. But it has to be the least restrictive. And the vast majority of our students, we have different codes for how we break down what are those LREs or those different environments. It gets a little technical, but most of our students receive services in that first tier, which is an LREA, which is that environment in which they receive service, which is the vast majority of the day is time spent in gen ed. But we want our students with disabilities to be able to access and to be ready for college and career and community, just like any non-disabled student would. And to do that, the most effective way to do that is as inclusive of an opportunity as we can for a student.
And I also feel it's a lot of acceptance too. So
Sure.
I mean, that
Yeah.
way children can talk, they associate, there's acceptance. There's not that isolation that could have been, you know,
Sure.
60s or 70s. I think it is a good thing, and I personally love having our children intertwined in work.
Excellent. We've come a long way. We're in the business of continuous improvement when it comes to inclusion. You've heard me talk about the work around the TIES initiative that we're doing. It's really not an initiative. It's work around inclusion. It's very much under that lens of equity, which is a very big thing for us.
I really appreciated the comments that one of the special education teachers made tonight, tying it all to the strategic plan. And I think she was spot on, where because we're not just taking 6 bodies and throwing it at the situation, we've got a very specific and well thought out plan about how we're going to, okay, we're increasing the resources for special ed by about 10%, but there's a very specific plan around how we're going to do that, to really optimize how we're using those resources, and that will really have an impact on every one of our 4 pillars of the strategic plan. So I appreciated those comments and where we're really taking this going forward. And as you said, we're not done. This is just the first year of strategic plan initiatives, right? Where we've turned the corner, right? We were in a period of contraction for a very long time. Last year was the first year that we turned the corner, and now we're building back in, and we're building very specific plans around all of that. So very, very excited and happy about where this is headed. Board members, do we have any other questions? And I think the one thing that I still had was after hearing the public feedback tonight, I don't think that there's much that we can ask the legislators to do for us at this point from a funding perspective down in Annapolis, right? Because the formula is the formula, and it's all going to be about Kerwin the rest of this session, right? But we heard very resoundingly about the paperwork and everything, like of being in compliance. Is there anything to be done from a legislative perspective of trying to rein that back in? Because it really feels like it's kind of gotten out of control. I mean, I understand what they're trying to accomplish with all of that paperwork, but it's gotten so blown out of control that our special ed resources are spending so much time doing the paperwork and not actually working with the kids. Is there anything that we can do and direct the legislators to try to make a difference?
It's a tough one. Probably not. I think the difficult piece of it is I mean, we try not to make a mistake, and the special educators know that mistakes are very costly, not only in capital but also in time. We are monitored for compliance through the State Department of Education very often on lots of different things. We have a performance plan in which there are federal indicators that we're evaluated against every year, and a lot of those compliance indicators are 100% indicators. So it's and we do very well on that report consistently. But the difficult part is the thresholds are set very high, and I think the spirit behind it is because all students are entitled to that free and appropriate public education. I think, you know, that's why that standard is as such at 100. But it makes it, because we are in the human business, being 100% all the time. In some areas is a challenge to do. My folks, the supervisors and the consultants who work with teachers on a regular daily basis, we meet often. We're always asking ourselves those questions of, what can we do to make things better for our folks? We have a lot of great ideas, but a lot of times there's a form behind that idea, and we've pumped the brakes on more forms and ideas than what we've put out. When we do put something out, though, there's a very purposeful intent behind it. It may be difficult to see at the surface level as to how this helps us, but when we do a better job at, like, using the eligibility tools that I talked about, when we make good decisions as it relates to eligibility, that has a ripple effect throughout what we do in special education. That means we're proportionate in our identification, that we have data to support our decisions that we make. And through the dispute and resolution process, if there's a state complaint, if we enter into due process, the consequences of being wrong in those instances are significant. And obviously we try to minimize those, but the law is the law, and it's hard for us to, we have to implement what we're required to do. But we are always mindful of what we are asking our staff to do in addition to what's out there that we're legally required to do. But the tools that we've developed, those a couple of extra pieces of paperwork that are out there, are intended to help us be more compliant overall, which in the end will have a savings for us. But it's hard.
So you're saying, while we've seen and heard tonight that there's a lot of paperwork, you don't think it's unwarranted paperwork? You don't think there's any reason to...
I don't think it's unwarranted, but I will say it is a lot of paperwork.
I
There's
agree,
no doubt about
but
it.
we shouldn't fight to make it less paperwork. We just need to deal with it.
It is what it is, and that's the difficult piece. I just don't know what impact we would be able to have, because the sections, in the federal standard, it's all identified in what we have, and really there hasn't been any. There has been recent legislation with consent and a few other things that have added some paperwork to that. How we determine eligibility for students who participate in the alternate assessment is very stringent, and there is a ton of paperwork behind the scenes for that, as it should be, because we're making a very big, significant decision with a family on a student, and are they pursuing a certificate of program completion, or are they pursuing a diploma? That's a very big decision. There is a lot of paperwork that goes with that, but it should, because of the weight of that. And it helps frame IEP teams to make a good, informed decision in the best interest of the student.
And to Board Member Savigny's original question, and to echo Nick's assessment, the General Assembly generally has been moving in the opposite direction in the last 20 years. So Nick mentioned consent requirements, other forms of identification and testing, or a desire to expand categories of special ed identification are ongoing in the General Assembly. One of the speakers earlier, Robert Herbstromer, talked about the 5-day notification rule. That's a law that the General Assembly enacted, I would guess, within the last 10 years. And they'll continue to toil this year, as they have for the past several years, with the burden of proof, shifting the burden of proof from the parent to you, and due process hearings, which is, I think, indirectly possibly more paperwork for
Most
our
definitely.
folks. And witness fees. All of their work tends to focus on compliance aspects, which tends to carry paperwork with it, and you'll see more of that this year, not the opposite.
Well, Mr. Kyler, I think you probably phrased it a little bit better than I did. Like, is it unwarranted paperwork, right, was the question. And I think that's where I was really headed with that. Like, is there anything that can be pared away? Like, I don't want to do away with stuff that's beneficial and are good indicators of success for our special needs kids. But, is there anything that's unwarranted? And if you're saying that none of it is really unwarranted...
We will always keep
then-
our eyes open for that. We'll always ask ourselves the critical question of, is this good for kids? And if it is, we'll continue it. And if it's something we can revise, shorten, or eliminate, we most definitely will.
And I think there for a while with incorporating technology, the aim was to reduce the paperwork.
Yeah.
Paper
Yeah,
reduction.
it didn't, I mean, I don't think it reduced it any. We still maintain a digital file and a paper file for all of our students. And And again, some of our students require a lot of services and may have required those services over a long period of time. So as you know, you may see there are students that will have a rather large paper file, but that's reflective too of a lot of work. The plan sometimes gets a bad rap, but you can't have good, as with any teaching, you have to have a good plan for good delivered instruction to take place. So a well-written plan will frame what a student does well and what does a student need to work on, and then the strategies to get kid to those clear, measurable goals. So it is hard, it takes a lot of work, but a well-written plan will result in good instruction for a student.
And I think at one point we had heard what one of the middle schools was doing as far as, trying to make life a little bit easier for those special ed folks at the one school. I mean, are there other creative?
I mean, staff are always welcome. When I assign staff to the building, I give them the autonomy to structure how they want to deliver services. And teams of special educators will work with their administrators to determine what fits for the students within that snapshot of time. It's interesting how when you look at a student from a year to year, how much that can change with, especially at the middle school level, for example, where you have a new student group coming in and then a student exiting group. So you've got 2/3 of your that we're in transition on. But the teams, if they want to use and get creative and have someone do a little bit more of the case management and someone else can do a little bit more of the service delivery, I'm okay with that. There are definite pros and definite cons to using that model. We don't have the overall structure to be able to do that systemically, but schools get very creative, and what one teacher does one year might be very different next year. I'm always a proponent of trying to minimize the number of grade levels that a special educator works to support. Because as a special educator, you have to know specially designed instruction, but you also have to be knowledgeable of the grade level content. If you're working across 4 grade levels in an elementary school, it's doable, but it gets harder. If you're concentrated in 2 grade levels, that might be K and 1, that works great. But the distribution of students changes every year. Right. You might be really heavy in eligibility in students in grade 3. So, if you've got 3 teachers at the elementary level, it's not as simple as doing all right, you take K1, you take 2, 3, you take 4, 5, because you could have a disproportionate number of students in any one grade level. So as we're assigning staff, we're looking at those things. As kids are coming in, as kids are exiting, how is that changing the dynamics of the distribution of students across grade levels? You've heard me say we talk about students eligible, we talk about the number of services they require, we talk about the number of service hours that they have in their IPs. You can't look at any one measure. That's why a singular formula just doesn't quite work.
And I will say that I did take Mr. Anderson to Shiloh, and that is a buy-in from the top, from the administration. And it also has to be a buy-in with every educator in that building to be able to work and have a little different type of situation. And yes, that program will not work in every school, but they were creative and they had a great leader and it worked from the top down. And that's a happy special education department. And I cannot say that when I go to Tawnytown. I've been there. It's a whole different, and I don't mean to create, compare schools, but they're just overwhelmed and they just have a different organization. And that's why I've been making comments about we need more special educators.
And that's why we've targeted the elementary level, because when you're looking at providing services over 6 or 7 different grade levels, that becomes very complex to do. So that is a big reason why we've targeted there. We know that we want to bring equity in planning time for our elementary special educators, and per their current contract, there's a difference in elementary and speech and language pathologist planning time compared to secondary special educators, and we know that that's something we need to improve and work on.
So board members, this is our last opportunity in a work session setting before we so the plan is to approve the budget request that we send across the street to the commissioners at the board meeting a week from today, right? So this is kind of our last chance to say whether there's anything in here that we still have questions on, if there's anything that we disagree with. So have we asked all of our questions? Are we all, so we know that we were picking off the strategic plan initiatives, that really the 6 special educators, the 1 school psychologist, and the 1 tech services person, those were what we identified as our main needs for this budget cycle. Those are built in, and we have a long-term plan built in that we think is sustainable over the next 5 years in accordance with trying to line up with the commissioner's 5-year budget schedule. So just wanted to make sure that this is kind of a speak now kind of moment.
And of course, we always hear things from the community, like, why don't we have this? Why can't we add that? Like, I always hear about foreign language and more opportunities for students, but there's only so much we can do, you know? I do wish we had a money tree outside. I really do.
If we had the magic wand that somebody was talking about earlier.
That'd be great. I mean,
But what I will say is that even though we've specifically identified these 8 positions as our first go at staffing for some of our strategic plan initiatives, there is a lot else that's going on as well that doesn't necessarily have dollars associated with it at the moment. We've got a lot of planning going on, and the technology strategy plan, I think, is going to help with equity in the schools of, you know, long-term, we're looking at how do we get more opportunities in front of kids for different languages, for government classes, for different things. That's all happening right now as well.
Yeah, no, I think Cindy and I have been working closely on the virtual learning direction, and world languages is very much a part of that conversation. We do have to focus on equity and making sure that depending on your zip code as a student, you have the same access as another student in our county. So virtual opportunities are a way to do that.
Yes, and we'll be bringing that information to an upcoming board meeting this spring.
Later this spring.
Yeah.
Yep.
I am concerned, though, with that shortfall. We're going to have to get creative and see what we're going to do there. You know, we can't forget that.
So that was certainly the biggest concern when seeing this, right, with the revised
That
state
was-
estimates,
yes.
that now that we're 1.1 million less. But Dr. Lockard, I know that we're looking for the efficiencies behind the scenes, and
Yep.
And thank you all for all your hard work, because I know this is not a one-person operation.
That's right.
And like, I think both of you said earlier, it isn't a 1-month deal either. It's been talked about a long time, so a lot of the questions have been talked about and studied, and I think we're, as far as submitting this budget, I think we're in good shape.
I just want to echo Ms. Herbert's comments. You know, we're fortunate in Carroll County that we have a community that cares about education, that we get people to advocate for the things that are important. I'm also appreciative of the fact that we have a stellar team of folks that you referenced that are doing a lot of work helping us to achieve some of these goals, getting creative, as Nick talked about, being innovative with what we have and looking at things differently and reprioritizing how we go about it, because it isn't always going to be about infinite dollars that we wish we had. Sometimes we have to look at what do we currently have and how can we do things differently, which has been a big part of the process this year and some of that budget conversations within all our departments. So I appreciate that recognition, and am very thankful for the staff we have here, as well as certainly the day-to-day great things that happen in our classrooms with our staff in our schools.
Members, any other questions or comments? All right, then I will thank everyone for being here this evening, and we will see you a week from tonight at the next board meeting. Thank you.